Well, today you are in for a treat. One of my favorite communicators ever is here to preach today. And Dan and Rachel Hunter, all the way from Houston, Texas today. And I met Dan almost 20 years ago, believe it or not. And he will be turning 50 next weekend. So you got to wish him a happy birthday for that. I know. It's still a happy deal. Because he doesn't look 50 and he doesn't act 50. So it's just 50 is a number. It doesn't big deal. And there's people in the room older than that, Dan, I promise you. So, yes, I did freak out when I turned 40 a little bit. But anyways, Dan is here, and he's going to bring the word. But him and Rachel have just been tremendous friends, influencers, leaders in our life. They love our family. They love our kids. And they've just been a huge blessing to us. And Dan travels all around the nation teaching and preaching and doing leadership and is just a phenomenal friend, communicator, and we're so blessed to have him on our board of overseers as well, where he serves and helps our executive leadership team in many ways. So Dan, Rachel, thank you for coming, even in the midst of a pandemic, to hang out with us, to bring the word today. So Adventure Church, can you show some love to Dan Hunter as he comes and brings the word today?
You know, I do love your pastors so much. I know you do too, and they are just incredibly wonderful and just great people. And not only do they love God, I think one of the greatest things about them is that they love you guys and they love this city and they love this area and this church, and they just love really well. They do. They love well, and so can you just let them know how grateful you are that they are here, that they started Adventure Church, and you couldn't have better pastors, and that's the truth. You really couldn't. Their family is really one of our favorites, and we just love you guys. Every time I'm here, I'm blown away at what God's doing, you know, and I'm just blown away at the faithfulness of God and how miraculous God is. And aren't you just aware of all the good things that God has done? I mean, think about this. Like, you're in it every day, so you don't get to really see. It's like your kids, you know, when you see them every day and then pretty soon they're shaving and you're like, how did that happen? But when you look at, you know, your Facebook and the memories pop up and all that stuff, all of a sudden you see, oh, wow, they've grown a lot. And can I just tell you, as someone who comes a lot and comes every year, you guys are really blessed. And I just want you to just continue to recognize God's goodness and how faithful God is. Because even though it's been a rough season, I know this, that God's still working, God still does miracles, and it's been tough since March. And I don't know if you were aware of this in Ohio, but there's this pandemic around, called coronavirus. And so I know you got your masks, and so do I. See, I got a mask too. And so we all it's just been weird. And then for a while, we didn't even have sports. Do y'all remember no sports? On TV from March to June, I didn't even know what to do with my life. And so I'm I don't know what to watch. And so I'm starting to there's a cornhole tournament on TV. And so I'm turning on cornhole. I'm excited about that. I'm not excited about that. And so in the midst of no sports, I feel a little ashamed, but I got addicted to a different channel, HGTV. I'm a little ashamed, but at the same time, I'm not that ashamed. Have you seen Love It or List It? It's amazing. And then that show, Hometown, I mean, come on. That is just, I'll see it and I'm like, hey, babe, have we seen this one? Because if not, we need to record this. And now I got 40 recordings of Hometown on there. And then it's just HTV TV is amazing. What happens is there's this old broken, every show, it doesn't even matter the title of the show, this is what it is. There's an old broken down house, they need to renovate it, it's old and it's messed up and it's got all kind of stuff going on and so they want to open concept, they want it newer, and so they'll go in there, they'll find the perfect house, but then they'll start making it better and then at the end of the show they bring the same people back, and they hadn't seen it in a few weeks or whatever it's been, and all of a sudden at the end of the show, they show them and they freak out. Some of them start crying and they start recognizing this, and then at the end of it, they're just like, dude, this is a miracle, man. It's miraculous what you have done. And in a lot of cases, it is miraculous, but isn't it true that we throw this word miraculous out way too often, you know? It is miraculous, but come on. I mean, God is the one that is miraculous, and He wants to do miracles. And for some of you, even like one of these shows, it's almost like areas of your life need a makeover. It's like areas of your life, you need God to step in and rejuvenate your marriage. You need God to step in and bring some healing to your body. And maybe there's areas of your life that looks like one of these broken down homes. But can I tell you, even better than some couple on a TV show that can do wonders in a house, can I just tell you, we serve a God who is sitting up in heaven, and he wants to do wonders in your marriage. He wants to do miracles in your life. He wants to do miracles in this nation. Come on, like stir your faith up a little bit with that, because God is for you. He's not against you, and God is on your side. And I want to encourage you with this thought, is that God makes miracles out of messes and mistakes. Now, I don't know this to be completely true, but I'm 99.99999% sure nobody in here started coronavirus. But can I just tell you who's bigger than coronavirus? God. We didn't make that mess. We didn't make that mistake, but God is bigger than that. And can I tell you, even in your life, for there's messes and mistakes that we walk through, seasons of pain and struggle. And can I just tell you, even in the midst of things that you didn't even cause, but God's so good that even if you did cause it, he can step in and make a miracle out of messes and mistakes. And when I think about the miracles of Jesus, I'm drawn to a lot of different stories, but there's one story today that I want to park on, and it's the story of the paralytic. So if you have your Bible, open up to Mark chapter 2. Okay, and we're going to kind of live in there, so keep it like open on your phone. If you got a Bible app, or if you got a paper Bible today, open that up, Mark chapter 2, and we're going to dive into this story. And as you're finding it, what you'll see is that Jesus is in this place called Capernaum, which is kind of like his hometown, and he's going back and forth, and so he's here in this thing, and he's found himself in a house, and so just to set this up, the house is usually a small house, but it's just one big room. Sometimes they had like a curtain that they would close off a section of that room for a bedroom, and then up on the roof, they would have sturdy roofs because they would actually do work up there. They would actually go up there to work, maybe do their crafts, whatever it might be, or laundry. Sometimes they would even go up there and take afternoon naps, which sounds pretty amazing. And so they would do that, but they would have like a little ladder on the side of the house, and they would use the roof for this reason. And so this is where we walk into this story in Mark chapter 2. Everybody with me? So in your Bible, on the phone, or if you ain't got either, right there on the screen. In Mark chapter 2, it says this: a few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door. Picture this for just a moment. I mean, the house was so packed, you couldn't even move. And here Jesus was in the midst of them, begins to teach. There were no windows. It wasn't glass. They were just cut open. We call them windows, but there was no glass. It was just open. They may have a sheet hanging over it, but his voice would travel through the holes in the walls. We call them windows now. And it would travel through that so that the people filled the streets and to hear Jesus talk. And this is where we enter the scene. And it says, not even outside the door. And he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralyzed man carried by four of them. It's important to note this, that when they carried him, just stay right there, we'll pick it back up in just a minute. But like these four men came bringing this guy that was paralyzed, right? I think sometimes we look at this and we're like, too bad for him. But can I tell you that we're all kind of like that paralyzed man? That there's maybe areas of your life that you feel paralyzed by fear or even anxiety today. And some of you over the last several months, you've had bouts of depression and bouts of anxiety. And if you're really truthful, you almost can feel paralyzed internally about your future and your retirement. And you can feel paralyzed about maybe a diagnosis from a doctor that you've received. And it's easy to be not just one of the people in the crowd wanting to hear from Jesus, but if we're really honest, our marriage can feel paralyzed. Our future, our business, maybe you've gotten laid off, and no matter what's happened, it's easy to be this paralyzed guy. But watch this, and this is what's so important to see, is when the Bible says that these four dudes actually came bringing the paralyzed, they didn't have him by his arms and legs bringing him. They actually had a bed, a mat. You'll read this in all the synoptic gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so they'll have this mat. It was like a bed. It was like a stretcher, if you will, right? And so they were carrying him on this stretcher. And what's important to understand is the mat was just a solution to allow this guy to live with his problem more comfortably. Are you with me? The mat, there was nothing special about it. It was just they came up with a solution in order to live more comfortably with the problem. And if we're not careful, what happens is you and I, in our desperate state of being paralyzed, or maybe even in this nation with the division that exists and even the issues with COVID, or maybe in your own life with your health and your healing, or maybe with your anxiety and depression, what we're tempted to do is to create a solution to live more comfortably in our problem rather than run to Jesus because he is the answer to our problem. And so let me just challenge you, nothing wrong with the mat, but can I just tell you, don't live in the mat. Don't live in the place that you've built so that you can kind of live more comfortably. Listen, if your marriage needs Jesus today, you can find him. If you've got sickness in your body, you can find him. And it's so important because here's the point. Too often we comfort what's wrong rather than confront what's wrong. So today, here's what I want you to do. Listen. What I want you to do today is, can we just confront what's wrong and recognize that Jesus can heal? He can restore. He can bring unity. Come on. He can bring provision where maybe you've had drought. He can bring your kids back to faith. And whatever it might be, let's not comfort what's wrong and just make a bed for it, but let's confront what's wrong. Because watch what happens when you confront what's wrong. These 4 men, paralyzed man, they didn't just live in the comfort of the mat. They brought it to Jesus. Watch what happens in Mark 2 as we keep reading in verse 4. It says, since they could not get to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus. They don't tell you this, but they somehow got up on the roof. We'll talk about that in a minute. And Jesus, by digging through and lowered the mat that the man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, everybody say faith. When Jesus saw their faith, when Jesus saw their faith, when he saw their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, your sins are forgiven. Think about that for just a moment. Faith in Jesus created this moment where the miraculous happened. Now, he was paralyzed. He obviously had a need. But there was a greater need too, because he says your sins are forgiven. In other words, he came with one need, but Jesus is so good that even when you come with one need, he can heal all the needs in your life, even the ones you don't even know you need. He can bring joy to the depressed, at the same time opening up a new door in your business for even more things to be flourishing in your life, provision, ample healings to be happening in your life, and the peace of God to come, and you didn't even know you needed it. And then watch this in verse 11. Skip down to verse 11. He says to him, I tell you, get up, take your mat, go home. He got up, took his mat, walked out in full view of them all. We'll come back to this as well. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, we have never seen anything like this. And can I just tell you that in this place, if we will have faith that God can and God will, I just believe with all my heart, you're going to see things that you've never seen God do yet. And I know what's amazing about Adventure Church and your pastors and this staff and team is you can look back and there are testimony after testimony after testimony about how God has provided financially, opened up land for you, even the building you're about to embark on. But there's more than that. There's life change, there's restoration, there's healings, there's miracles. Come on, there are salvations. And when you look at this, it's amazing. And looking back is amazing, but sometimes all we do is look back. But I want you to look forward and recognize you're going to have things happening in Adventure Church and in your marriage and family that you have never seen before. Miracles are coming, and there's a greater day coming. Yeah, come on, give the Lord a hand clap. But here's the thing. Some of you go, well, I don't have faith for a lot of that. I don't have faith for my marriage. You don't know how long we've been struggling. You don't have to have great faith. You just got to have a little faith in a great God. And sometimes we're like, well, I don't have any faith. All I got is fear. Did you know this? That fear is actually faith put in the wrong place. Fear is not the opposite of faith. Fear is faith, but faith in something other than God. And when we put our faith in other things, that's when fear rises up, because fear is a form of faith. But faith moves the very heart of God. So I'm going to challenge you. Take your faith out of all the things that's causing anxiety and depression and worry in your life and place them in God, because that's how you create a moment where the miraculous can happen. It's a lot like, I don't know, I doubt anybody in here is like this. But some of you know how it is to drive a car when there's other people in the car that like to be backseat drivers. Or passenger seat drivers. Now, I don't want any elbows going like this, right? But you know as well as I do, there's some people in a car and they'll be just like, hey, can you slow down a little bit? Can you back off from that car right there? Hey, why don't you go? Hey, it's been green for 0.3 seconds. Why don't you just move already? Hey, what about if you took a right? I think you should take this road instead of that road. Why are you going straight? I think this way is quicker. I think this way is longer. And I'm just like, why don't you drive? Right? I think it's really easy sometimes in our fear and anxiety to be a backseat driver with God. And I think sometimes God's going, look, do you trust me or not? Am I really in control, or do you want to sit over there, act like I'm in control visually, but then tell me everything to do as well? And so God is working in your faith, and there's something that faith would shout to you and I through this simple story in Mark chapter 2, that I want to pull out a few things that I think faith would shout to you, shout to me through the story of the paralytic, that God would want to challenge us with in our faith to recognize, to stir up more faith. You ready? Number one would be this, and there's 4 things I want to draw. So stay right there in Mark 2, and we'll point them out as we go. Mark chapter 2, okay, verse 1. Point 1, you ready? Faith would say to us in this room, surround yourself with people who can do what you cannot do. Come on, there is power in that. Do you even hear this? Surround yourself with people who can do what you cannot do. I think it's so cool and unique about this story that there were 4 people who carried the paralytic, and we can bypass this fact so easily in this story when the reality is this paralytic was wise enough to surround himself, watch this, this is spiritual, to surround himself with people who could do what he could not do. What the paralyzed guy could have done was, hey, roll me over here to the paralyzed community and just leave me on a mat next to all the other people on a mat. And we'll just all lay here on our mats together and talk about what a horrible season this is in the United States, how everything is in division, how everything is awful, and that we can just all lay here on our mats and talk about all the awful things in life. But this paralyzed man was smart enough to say this, I know what I can't do, so I need people around me who can do what I can't do so that I can go where I probably couldn't go without them, so that these people's faith could breathe on me a little bit. And then all of a sudden, when I don't have any faith, their faith can ignite me. And then all of a sudden, do you see the power in this? Because our faith is either drug up or drug down based on those around us. You got to hook yourself up. Listen to me. Who are you hooking yourself up to? You got to hook yourself up to people moving where you want to go, not where you already are. So in other words, if your marriage is struggling, you need to get around some people whose marriage is phenomenal. And you need to start asking them, man, tell me the 3 things you do in your marriage that's the most important to the success you have. Come on, get around some people who go to church and their kids are serving God. Hey, tell me. I mean, my wife and I, we do this all the time. And we're like, hey, tell me what's the best things you ever did to raise your kids in church. Come on, tell me what you would do. And get around some people who maybe aren't doing what you're doing or struggling where you're struggling. And maybe if you're depressed, get around some people who have joy and let that joy breathe on you a little bit and kind of stir up inside you. Because here this paralyzed guy hooked himself up with 4 other friends who carried him to Jesus, recognizing these people can do what I can't do. This is who I need to hook up with. In other words, in this season, if you're online, listen to me, this is so important. You need to hook yourself up to somebody who is doing what you cannot do. Get in a small group virtually. Come on, find a way and recognize, even in this room, that what we do here in this room is, man, get involved. Hook yourself up faith-wise. Get around people who worship. If you're struggling to worship, get around some people who are doing what you can't do right now, and you're going to find your faith is lifted. Here's the point. You need people who will carry you to your deliverance, not just comfort you in your crisis. You know what we're really good at? Is getting around people who will go, man, I hate that. Put their arm around us and say, man, I'm so sorry about it. And can I tell you, that's important. You need people who will sympathize and empathize with you, for sure. You need that. But you also need some people to go, hey, but I know who your answer is. I know in the midst of this problem, I know where you need. You need more of Jesus. Come on, let me pray for you. Man, you need some people who will breathe life into you. And here, this paralyzed man got 4 people around him and to speak life to him and began to bring him to Jesus. So my question would be this: are you running with people just like you, or maybe dysfunctional in some areas just like you, or you've surrounded yourself with people who can breathe life into your paralyzed places? So number 1, I think faith would shout to us through this story. It's pretty powerful. That to surround ourselves with people who can do what we cannot do. But number 2, I think this is huge too. Number 2, let your desperation drive you in the right direction. Let your desperation drive you in the right direction. I think too often we forget that we are going to have seasons and moments of desperation, right? I mean, look, this is normal. You're going to have seasons where you're desperate for a pay increase. You're desperate for a job. You're desperate for a healing. You're desperate for unity. You're desperate for the world to change. You're desperate for people that don't know Jesus to come and find you. And in your desperation of your needs and in your paralyzed state, what happens is we oftentimes let our desperation drive us to something rather than someone. Because in your desperation, you'll be tempted to think that the answer is a gallon of ice cream. You'll be tempted to think that the answer is a vacation. You'll be tempted to think that the answer is just a long nap, right? You'll be tempted to think the answer is a new car. You'll be tempted to think the answer is the person that works next to you, that girl over there who's not your spouse, and you'll think that they're the answer. And pretty soon you start looking for people and things as though they're the answer in your desperation. But listen, you cannot run to things in your desperation. You got to let your desperation drive you to someone, and his name is Jesus. And what I love about this story is here the paralytic, he was desperate, but he didn't let his desperation drive him to some other vice or thing that could try to fill the void in his anxiety and depression. But he let his desperation say, look, nothing can stop me. I got to have Jesus. So in our desperation, what are you chasing? Now listen, those of you who are online, in this season that we're in your desperation, what is it that matters most right now? What is it that you're chasing most right now? Because that's what your desperation is driving you to. Make sure that your desperation is driving you in the right direction. I remember a few years ago, I was flew into Minneapolis, Minnesota, because it was a couple hours away, was this event that I was speaking at. And so I took one of my daughters with me. I got twin girls. And so we fly into Minneapolis, and she's 8 years old or something at the time. And I'm just like, okay, babe, you need anything before? Okay, no. Okay, we'll get in. So she gets in the car, and we start driving. I say, okay, you need anything? You need to do it? Okay, no. And so we leave Minneapolis. And then I know it's about a 2-hour, 30-minute drive, 2-hour, 40-minute drive, something like that. And so when we leave Minneapolis, what I didn't know was that the majority of the trip was going to be in the middle of nowhere, that there's going to be no more stops, no more gas stations, no more places to eat, literally just cornfield and open fields on either side, trees on either side for the next 2 hours. Well, that's fine because I'm not scared of nothing, but the problem is about 15 minutes outside of town, it's like something started happening in my stomach where I needed to go to the restroom. And so I started to like shift a little bit, and I'm just like driving, putting it on cruise so I could do one of these numbers, and like I'm like this, and so I'm starting shifting, and my daughter's sitting over here, and she's like, Dad, what are you doing? And I said, nothing. And so she's like, okay, well, you're sure acting weird. And I said, well, it's just whatever. And so about 15 more minutes, now it's starting to get a little desperate, and like I'm like shifting, I'm like sitting up in my seat like this, driving the steering wheel like this, and then like I'm like this, and then I'm sitting back, and I'm leaning back, and I'm moving forward, and then I'm like bouncing like this, and like I know it's starting to get really desperate, and so I know this is desperation is beyond like pull over and there's a tree there. No, it isn't that desperation. It's the other desperation, and now there's things like moving, and now my daughter thinks it's funny, so she pulls out her iPad and starts videoing me and like taking pictures, and I'm like, that ain't funny for sure, and so she's laughing at me and like trying to tickle me and stuff, and I'm just like, no, we ain't doing that because I'm desperate. And so I'm driving another 15 minutes, it's been an hour of like, I'm talking about pain. And I need bad relief. You know what I'm saying? I need deliverance in here. And so I'm driving, and can I just tell you that I finally see it, like 5 miles away, there's a sign that says 5 mile exit. I'm like, oh my God, yes. And I see, as we get closer and closer, I see the golden arches, and heaven has given me, shined in all of its glory. The McDonald's is right there. So I was like, okay, babe, listen, here's what we're gonna do. And the whole time I'm shifting like this, and like if you know me, this is my personality, I'm like shifting like this, and then I'm just like, every once in a while hitting the steering wheel, because if this hurts, then this doesn't hurt. You know what I'm saying? So like, it's like, I just want something to like bring my mind off of it. And so like, I start exiting, and then sure enough, this is true. I'm just like, oh my word. We exit, and there's just orange cones, and they had construction in the road. There's like 15 cars backed up, and I'm like, oh my word. And you know, the closer you get to your deliverance, the worse things get. You know how that goes? And so like now I'm like really desperate because I can see relief, but I'm still nowhere near relief. And then it hit me as I turn over to my daughter, and I said, babe, listen, when I get in that parking lot, I know that you're only 8, but listen, here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna just jump out. I don't even care if there's a parking space. I'm gonna pull up to the door, space or no space, and I'm jumping out, and I'm running as fast as I can. You grab the door, shut it, lock the doors, and stay right here and don't move. And I know that's horrible parenting, but when you're desperate, you're desperate. And so, sure enough, I look at it, and then in the middle of telling my daughter that, it hits me. I'm in a rental car. What do I care if I go off-roading? And so I just jump the curb. We're dead stopped. I jump the curb, go down a ditch, And I pull up to the other side. Cars are coming, and I'm like honking, stopping them. And so I cross that road illegally, and then jump another ditch, and then jump the curb of McDonald's, pull up to McDonald's, and I go, you stay right here. Throw it in park, and I run into McDonald's as quick as I can, run into the restroom. I jump in, I sit down, and I'm like, oh, thank you, Jesus. Then, in that moment, I remembered as I'm sitting there that I didn't see any urinals when I ran into that restroom. And then I heard, as the door opened, and two female voices walk in, and I know they're not in the wrong place. And I realized, in my desperation, I literally ran the wrong direction. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, I got an 8-year-old girl in the car outside. What do I do? So I just took the walk of shame. I walked out, I raised my hand and said, I'm sorry. I know, I'm more embarrassed than you are. Trust me, I know. And I walk out, and I just get in the car, and I drive away. Can I just tell you, in your desperation, if you're not careful, your desperation will drive you to the wrong direction. But you got to make sure that you're chasing the right things in seasons of vulnerability. Some of you are walking through seasons where you're vulnerable financially. You're vulnerable in your marriage. As a nation, we're vulnerable right now. Everything is tense. We don't know where the answer's coming from. And if you're not careful, listen, those of you at home, in the state of vulnerability, and right now what we're walking through, in division and in struggle and in strife, maybe you need healing, maybe you've lost your job. In this moment of your desperation, you be very careful the choices you make and what you surround yourself with, and you make sure to run in the right direction. Because when you chase God, see what I love about this paralyzed guy is, in his moment of desperation, he understood this: God is my answer. God's my answer. I don't need silver or gold. I don't need a home. I don't need friends who are laying in a bed next to me. What I need is to get to Jesus, and nothing can stop me. And in his desperation, he ran to God. And here's the point. When chasing God becomes a habit, miracles become a lifestyle. And what I want to challenge you is to stop, assess your life. How are you truly at chasing God? A great question is, how are you truly at chasing God in desperate seasons? Because oftentimes in desperate seasons, we stop worshiping. We stop going to church. We stop trusting God with the tithe. We stop giving. We stop doing. We stop serving. But it's in these times that we put God first, recognizing that when we seek him first, all these other things just happen and add to it. Psalm 63 says, you, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you. Make sure that you're longing, that you're seeking God, not something. In your desperation, you'll be tempted to seek things and people. But it's in these seasons that we seek God even more. But watch this. You heard in the story that we talked and we read just a moment ago, at the very end, in Mark chapter 2 and verse 11, here's what he says. Remember, if you got your Bible open on your phone or a paper Bible, he says, I tell you, take up your mat and go home. He got up and he took his mat and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, we've never seen anything like this. I want you to notice something. If that was me and I just got healed, the mat that I had been in, I would have left right there because I don't need that mess anymore. And when I walked out in full, why did Jesus say, get up, walk out in full view of them all, but grab your mat? Why did he do that? Here's why, and I want you to get this because this is so important. Your relationship with God, watch, will always change your relationship with the mat. He didn't leave the mat, he took the mat and walked out in full view of them all, carrying the mat that used to carry him. Listen to me. Something changed. Now he doesn't need the mat to carry him. Now he carries the mat as a testimony of what God has done. Some of you are struggling in your marriage. You need a healing. And what we're going through as a nation, I know it's disgusting. And I know it's tough. And I know there's anxiety. I know there's worry and there's stress. But can I just tell you, when we get on the other side, it isn't that we wipe this part of our history out and never talk about it. We don't just leave it there. No, we walk out in full view of them all, holding it above our heads and say, look what my marriage used to be, but look where it is today. Look where my kids used to be, but look where they, in other words, your relationship with the mat moves from something you needed to a testimony of God's goodness. He said, get up, take your mat and walk out in front of all of them so that you can declare how good God is. In your desperation, run after Jesus. And then number three, third thing that we find in this story in Mark chapter 2. Number one, surround yourself with people who can do what you cannot do. That's a challenge to some of you. You're not connected. You're not plugged in. You need to. Number two, let your desperation drive you there. Some of you need to assess what you're really seeking right now in the midst of this desperation. But number three, you got to believe in the miracle and not in the obstacle. This is about your faith. I know the obstacles are big. Can you just put yourself in the shoes of this paralytic, in the mat of the paralytic? First, just getting to where Jesus was a big deal. He can't walk. So that's an obstacle. Second, he gets there and the crowd is too big. It's another obstacle. And then how am I going to get through the crowd to be able to find Jesus? That's another obstacle. And then they had the idea to get up on the roof. How do you get up on the roof? It's already difficult because there's just a small little stepladder straight up and he's on a mat. How do they carry the mat up there? And then when you get up there, there's another obstacle that's even, have you ever noticed that the obstacle gets harder and harder and harder the closer to Jesus that he got? And can I tell you, some of you in your healing and in your marriage and in your anxiety and your fear, and maybe even as a church, what we're looking at and what we believe God's called us to in our vision, the closer you get to the vision, the closer you get to the healing and the restoration, the harder it's going to get. They get up there, and now there's a hard roof because people work up here and they do laundry up here. It's not just straw and thatch up there that they can easily separate. So now it's difficult, and they got to break through an actual roof and lower a paralyzed. So the obstacles keep coming. But you know what I notice in this story is their faith. They didn't highlight any of the obstacles. They didn't highlight that. What they highlighted was that he had to get to Jesus. So what do you believe in? That God can? Or do you believe that the obstacles are too big? Because doubt always sees the obstacles. Faith always sees the way. Faith doesn't ignore the obstacles as though they didn't exist. Faith says, yeah, the obstacles are real, but God is bigger, and he's worth it. If I can fight through this anxiety, if I can fight through this depression, if I can fight through the weirdness of attending a small group online, then I can know that God is bigger than all of this. The reality is, we do have trouble. John 16, verse 33 says, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. Have faith in God. Have faith that God can do miracles, not just in the obstacles. See, faith sees opportunities in the midst of obstacles, even when they're not obvious. Now, here's what I mean. If I was the guy on the mat, the paralytic, and my friends brought me there, I would have been like, I mean, it's okay. It's okay. It's too hard. It's too hard to carry me all the way there. And then I would have showed up, and I would have been like this. I would have been like, well, maybe it's too crowded. It's too crowded. I don't know what they're asking me to do that. I can't do that. It's too crowded. You know what? Maybe today's just not our day. I can't even see Jesus. I can barely hear him. You know what? I don't know. Maybe it just wasn't meant for today, and I would have gone home. How many times have we come to church on a Sunday, knelt down in our den and prayed on a Monday? How many times have we entered the presence of God? Listen to me. Those of you who are at home, maybe even some of you are right there right now, and you're saying, maybe it's just the way that it's supposed to be in our marriage. You're looking at the obstacles, not the faith that God can do anything. See, the closer you get to the miracles, the harder things get. But you got to keep pressing through and rip the roof off of the obstacles around you and find Jesus. So number one, you got to surround yourself with people who can do what you cannot do. Number two, you got to let your desperation drive you in the right direction. Number three, you got to believe for the miracle, not in the obstacle. And number four, listen to me, this is huge. Number four, you have to do all you can in the natural so that God will do all he can in the super. See, I think we want the supernatural. We know we need God to move in America. We know that. We need God to move in our marriages and in our healing, our body. We need God to move, man. In our finances, we need God to move. But we have to do all we can in the natural so that he can do all he can in the super. See, sometimes we think the supernatural is God's job. Can I tell you the supernatural is not God's job? Super is God's job. Natural is your and my job. You know what natural is? Obedience. What is God asking you to give? Where is God asking you to serve? Who is God asking you to talk to? Who is God asking you to love despite the fact that they're unlovable? Come on. What is God asking you to be faithful and obedient to? Because that is the natural. We do the natural, and in our natural, God brings the super. I think too often what happens is we start praying and saying, God, we need a move of God. I think sometimes God's up in heaven going, man, I'm waiting on a move of man. Because we do the natural, he does the super. Guess what's not his job? The natural, the obedience. That's not his job. That's our job. What does he ask you to give? He's asking you to tithe. He's asking you to trust. What is he asking you to lay down your life for? Come on, think about this. The natural is our job. Super's his job. And when I do my part, God does his part. The supernatural happens and Columbus is saved. People find Jesus. Marriages are healed. Kids come back to Jesus. Come on, think about it. We do the natural. He does the super. See, faith is not just knowing God can, it's trusting that God will. Mark chapter 2, verse 11 says, I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. He got up, took his mat, walked out in full view of them all. Testimony. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, we've never seen anything like this. You know what I believe? You've never seen anything like what God's about to do in your family. I want to stir your faith up. You've never seen anything like what God's about to do in Columbus. When y'all get this building built over here, you haven't seen anything like what God's going to do. I know your past is littered with testimony after testimony at Adventure Church, but there's more. And you know what I love? You found this in Mark chapter 2. I think it was in verse 4 or 5. It said Jesus saw their faith. Saw their faith. You know what the Bible never records in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? That the 4 people who brought the paralytic, nor the paralytic, none of them said a word. It's not recorded that any of them said anything. Their faith wasn't in their words of faith. Their faith was in their deeds of faith. What is God asking you to do? What is God asking you to be faithful in? What's he asking you to give? What's he asking you to say? Who's he asking you to love? Let's do the natural so that God can do the super.